Russia just lost operational control of the Black Sea. Not diminished control, not contested control, lost it. In the span of 72 hours, a waterway that Moscow has dominated for over 2 centuries became a hunting ground where Russian warships cannot operate without facing near certain destruction. Ukraine, a nation without a functional navy, just achieved what NATO planners said would require carrier strike groups and months of sustained operations. And the weapon that made this possible is not what anyone expected. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because what I am about to show you is not just a military story. It is a story about how modern warfare is being rewritten in real time by a country fighting for its existence. I am going to show you exactly how Ukraine transformed the Black Sea from Russia's strategic asset into a death trap that has forced Moscow to abandon positions it has held since the Crimean annexation. We will cover the specific weapons systems that made this possible, the strategic doctrine Ukraine developed to overcome a massive naval disadvantage, and the geopolitical consequences that are already reshaping power dynamics from Ankara to Washington. By the end, you will understand why Russia is scrambling to protect assets it once considered untouchable, and why the entire calculus of Black Sea security just changed forever. To understand why what just happened in the Black Sea represents a genuine inflection point, you need to understand what the Black Sea has meant to Russian strategic thinking for the past 250 years. This is not just another body of water. This is Russia's only warm water outlet to the Mediterranean, the foundation of its naval projection into the Middle East and North Africa, and the geographic feature that has shaped Russian foreign policy since Catherine the Great. The Black Sea measures roughly 615 miles from east to west and 320 miles from north to south. It connects to the Mediterranean through the Bosphorus Strait, a narrow passage controlled by Turkey under the Montreux Convention of 1936. This convention gives Turkey the authority to close the straits to warships during wartime, which means that the ships Russia stations in the Black Sea represent its entire deployable naval force in this theater. Reinforcement from other fleets requires either Turkish permission or acceptance of a force that cannot be resupplied if Turkey closes the straits. Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been headquartered in Sevastopol, Crimea, since 1783. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia maintained basing rights in Sevastopol through agreements with Ukraine. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, one of the unstated strategic objectives was securing permanent, uncontested control of this naval base and ensuring that Ukraine could never threaten Russian naval dominance in the Black Sea. Prior to February 2022, the Russian Black Sea Fleet consisted of approximately 40 surface combatants, ranging from frigates to corvettes, a submarine force, and extensive mine warfare and amphibious capabilities. This fleet was designed to project power, deny access to adversaries, and support ground operations along the Black Sea littoral. Russia viewed Black Sea dominance as non-negotiable, a geographic advantage that compensated for disadvantages elsewhere. Ukraine, by contrast, entered this war with effectively no navy. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, it seized most of Ukraine's naval vessels. The few ships Ukraine retained were obsolete Soviet-era craft that posed no serious threat to Russian naval operations. By conventional metrics, Ukraine had no ability to contest Russian control of the Black Sea. Naval warfare requires ships, and Ukraine did not have them. But Ukraine possessed something more valuable than ships. It possessed necessity, creativity, and a willingness to accept asymmetric solutions that conventional military doctrine would reject. And in October 2022, Ukraine began demonstrating that modern naval warfare might not require a navy at all. The development that changed everything arrived in the form of a weapons system that does not appear in traditional naval warfare doctrines. The Ukrainian-developed maritime drone, designated as the Magura V5, is a remotely operated surface vessel measuring approximately 18 feet in length, capable of speeds up to 42 miles per hour, and carrying a warhead payload of approximately 700 pounds of high explosives. This is not a sophisticated guided missile cruiser. This is essentially an unmanned speedboat packed with explosives and guided by operators who can be hundreds of miles away from the target. The tactical significance of this system became apparent in the early hours of March 8, 2026, when 3 Magura V-5 drones executed a coordinated strike against the Russian frigate Admiral Makarov, while it was conducting patrol operations approximately 60 miles southwest of Sevastopol. The Admiral Makarov, a Project 11356 frigate, displacing 4,000 tons and armed with Caliber cruise missiles, represents one of Russia's most capable surface combatants. It is equipped with radar systems designed to detect incoming threats, close-in weapon systems intended to destroy missiles and aircraft, and sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. None of these systems prevented the Magura V-5 drones from striking the vessel below the waterline in 3 separate locations. Video footage released by Ukrainian military intelligence showed the moment of impact, the subsequent secondary explosions, and the frigate listing heavily to port as damage control teams attempted to contain flooding. According to assessments from the Naval Institute, the Admiral Makarov suffered critical damage that will require months of repair work in dry dock facilities, effectively removing this vessel from operational status for the foreseeable future. But the Admiral Makarov was not the only target. Over the following 48 hours, Ukrainian maritime drones conducted strikes against 2 additional Russian vessels, a Rapusha-class landing ship designated Caesar Kunikov and a Tarantul-class corvette. The Caesar Kunikov was struck while anchored in what Russian commanders presumably considered a secure position near occupied Crimean waters. The vessel sank within minutes of being hit, taking with it the amphibious assault capability it represented. The Tarantul-class corvette suffered severe damage that forced it to return to port under emergency conditions. 3 major surface combatants damaged or destroyed in 72 hours. And here is where the strategic implications become clear. This was not random. This was a coordinated campaign demonstrating that Ukraine now possesses the ability to strike Russian naval assets throughout the northwestern Black Sea with weapons that cost a fraction of what the targeted vessels are worth. Think about the economics for a moment. A Magura V-5 maritime drone costs an estimated $250,000 to $300,000 to produce. The Admiral Makarov frigate represents an investment of approximately $500 million. The cost-exchange ratio is roughly 1 to 2,000. Ukraine can afford to lose dozens of drones to successfully strike a single frigate and still come out ahead strategically. Russia cannot afford to lose frigates at any rate because it cannot replace them. Russian shipbuilding capacity is constrained by sanctions, limited industrial infrastructure, and the simple reality that modern warships require years to construct. This creates an operational paradox that Russian naval commanders cannot solve. They can keep their vessels in port, where they remain safe but operationally useless, contributing nothing to Russian military objectives. Or they can deploy their vessels to conduct missions, knowing that every hour spent at sea increases the probability of encountering Ukrainian maritime drones that they have proven unable to reliably defend against. The data suggests Russian commanders have chosen safety over operational utility. According to analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, Russian naval activity in the northwestern Black Sea has decreased by approximately 65% since the strikes began. Vessels that previously conducted regular patrols are now remaining in port or operating only in the northeastern sections of the Black Sea, far from Ukrainian-controlled coastline and the range of these maritime drones. But there is another dimension to this that deserves attention. The Admiral Makarov and vessels like it are not just surface combatants. They are platforms for launching Caliber cruise missiles, the same weapons Russia has used to strike Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, and military positions throughout this war. Each frigate can carry up to 8 Caliber missiles with a range of approximately 1,500 miles, meaning these vessels represent strategic strike capability that threatens targets throughout Ukraine and beyond. By forcing these vessels to remain in port or operate in limited areas, Ukraine has effectively neutered a significant portion of Russia's long-range strike capability without destroying the missiles themselves. The missiles still exist, but the platforms that launch them are too vulnerable to deploy. This is strategic deterrence through asymmetric capability, the ability to impose costs that make certain operations prohibitively risky, regardless of the theoretical capabilities an adversary possesses. Now let us talk about how Ukraine developed the operational doctrine to make this possible. Maritime drone strikes are not new conceptually. What is new is the systematic application of these weapons in a coordinated campaign that treats the entire northwestern Black Sea as a contested battle space. Ukrainian operators have developed tactics that maximize the probability of successful strikes while minimizing the risk of detection and interception. Drones are launched from concealed positions along the coastline, often under cover of darkness or in weather conditions that limit radar effectiveness. They approach targets using routes that exploit radar blind spots, gaps in Russian sensor coverage created by geography, and the limitations of ship-based radar systems. Multiple drones are used in coordinated strikes, arriving from different vectors simultaneously. This overwhelms defensive systems designed to engage single threats and creates decision dilemmas for Russian crews who must allocate limited defensive resources across multiple incoming threats. Even if some drones are destroyed, others penetrate the defensive envelope and strike the target. The most sophisticated element is the intelligence architecture supporting these operations. Successful strikes require precise knowledge of vessel locations, movement patterns, and defensive postures. This intelligence comes from multiple sources, including commercial satellite imagery, signals intelligence that tracks Russian naval communications, and potentially human intelligence sources providing information about Russian naval operations. Ukraine is not conducting random attacks hoping to encounter targets. Ukraine is conducting planned strikes against identified vessels based on comprehensive intelligence that reveals when those vessels are most vulnerable. This is the operational sophistication that transforms experimental weapons into strategic capabilities. The strategic implications extend far beyond naval tactics. Control of the Black Sea determines whether Russia can sustain its forces in occupied Crimea, support operations along Ukraine's southern coast, and project power into the Mediterranean. Sevastopol is not just a naval base, it is the logistical hub that supports the entire southern axis of Russia's war effort. If Russian naval vessels cannot operate in the northwestern Black Sea without facing unacceptable risk, then Russia cannot adequately defend the sea lines of communication that connect Sevastopol to mainland Russia. This forces Russia to rely on alternative supply routes, including the Kerch Bridge, which Ukraine has already demonstrated the ability to strike, and land routes through occupied Ukrainian territory that are vulnerable to interdiction. The economic consequences are already manifesting. Commercial shipping in the Black Sea has shifted routes to avoid areas where Ukrainian maritime drones might be operating. Insurance rates for vessels transiting near Crimean waters have increased substantially. Russia's ability to use the Black Sea as a trade corridor has been degraded, imposing economic costs that compound the direct military effects. Then there are the geopolitical implications that ripple outward from the Black Sea to reshape broader regional dynamics. Turkey controls access to the Black Sea through the Bosphorus. Ankara has watched Ukraine degrade Russian naval power using asymmetric capabilities, demonstrating that Turkish closure of the straits would trap a Russian fleet that is already severely weakened. This shifts the regional balance of power and gives Turkey additional leverage in its complex relationship with Moscow. NATO allies with Black Sea coastlines, including Romania and Bulgaria, are observing that naval dominance can be contested without expensive surface fleets. The lessons learned from Ukrainian maritime drone operations will influence how these nations think about their own naval defense strategies and their contributions to collective security. Israel and other nations facing potential naval threats from adversaries like Iran or Hezbollah are studying Ukrainian tactics. If a nation without a navy can degrade a conventional fleet using low-cost drones, then similar approaches might work in other maritime theaters. The proliferation of these tactics represents a genuine shift in how naval warfare will be conducted in the 21st century. Russia is scrambling to adapt, but adaptation is not proving easy. Russian naval forces have increased defensive measures, including additional lookouts, more aggressive use of electronic warfare systems, and deployment of small boats to patrol areas around larger vessels. These measures impose operational costs, require additional personnel, and degrade the offensive capabilities of vessels that must allocate resources to self-protection. Russia has also attempted to develop its own maritime drone capabilities, but the evidence suggests these efforts are lagging significantly behind Ukrainian developments. Building effective drones requires technical expertise, precision manufacturing, sophisticated guidance systems, and operational doctrine that Russia is struggling to replicate quickly. Now we need to acknowledge the limitations and uncertainties that complicate this picture. Ukrainian maritime drones are effective against surface vessels in specific operational contexts, but they are not invincible. Russia retains substantial naval capabilities, including submarines that are much harder to target with surface drones, mine warfare capabilities that can deny access to certain areas, and air power that can potentially detect and destroy drones before they reach their targets. Ukrainian claims about damage inflicted on Russian vessels have sometimes proven difficult to verify independently. While video evidence confirms that strikes occurred, assessing the precise extent of damage requires information that is not always publicly available. Russia has obvious incentives to minimize reported damage, while Ukraine has incentives to maximize perceptions of effectiveness. The sustainability of Ukrainian maritime drone operations depends on continued access to components, technical expertise, and intelligence support. If Russia successfully interdicts supply chains or degrades the intelligence network supporting these operations, effectiveness could decline. This is an ongoing operational challenge that Ukraine must continuously manage. Weather conditions in the Black Sea can limit drone operations, particularly during winter months when rough seas make small surface vessels difficult to control. Russian commanders may calculate that seasonal factors will reduce the threat during certain periods, allowing more aggressive naval operations. Alternative perspectives on these developments exist within the strategic analysis community. Some analysts argue that Russian naval withdrawal from the northwestern Black Sea represents a temporary tactical adjustment rather than strategic defeat. They suggest Russia is conserving naval assets for future operations when conditions might be more favorable or when air defense systems can be improved to better counter drone threats. Others contend that Ukrainian successes reflect Russian incompetence and inadequate defensive measures more than revolutionary Ukrainian capabilities. According to this view, a more competent navy would have adapted more quickly and developed effective countermeasures against maritime drones. These perspectives deserve consideration even if the evidence suggests Ukrainian operations represent genuine strategic achievement rather than merely exploiting Russian mistakes. But step back and look at what this means. Ukraine, a nation invaded by a nuclear-armed power with one of the world's largest militaries, has managed to seize operational initiative in a critical maritime theater using weapons that did not exist in military inventories 3 years ago. This is not just tactical innovation. This is strategic adaptation under existential pressure, the kind of innovation that emerges when conventional approaches are inadequate and failure means annihilation. The implications will be studied in military academies for decades. How does a nation without a navy defeat a nation with a substantial fleet? What does maritime warfare look like when unmanned systems can strike high-value targets at minimal cost? How do traditional naval powers adapt to threats that do not fit within established doctrines? Russia is scrambling because it built a military designed to fight 20th century wars and finds itself in a 21st century conflict where adaptability matters more than raw firepower. The Black Sea Fleet was supposed to be a strategic asset that guaranteed Russian dominance. Instead, it has become a liability, expensive vessels trapped in port because the operating environment has become too dangerous. The forward projection from here suggests several probable developments. Ukraine will continue refining maritime drone capabilities, improving guidance systems, increasing range, and developing tactics that make interception even more difficult. Russia will attempt countermeasures including improved radar, more aggressive electronic warfare, and potentially deployment of assets specifically designed to hunt Ukrainian drones. The broader diffusion of these tactics to other conflicts seems inevitable. Non-state actors, regional powers facing conventional naval disadvantages, and nations seeking cost-effective deterrence will study Ukrainian methods and adapt them to their own circumstances. We are witnessing the emergence of a new domain of naval warfare that will reshape maritime security globally. For the Black Sea specifically, Russian naval power has been fundamentally degraded. Even if Russia develops effective countermeasures, the aura of invincibility is gone. Ukraine has demonstrated that Russian vessels can be struck, that Russian admirals make mistakes, and that technological advantages can be neutralized through creativity and determination. This changes the strategic calculus for any future negotiations over Crimea, over Black Sea security arrangements, and over the post-war order in this region. Ukraine enters those discussions having proven it can deny Russia the use of assets Russia assumed were secure. The Black Sea that existed before March 2026 is not coming back. Russia scrambles not just to protect its fleet, but to salvage a strategic position that Ukraine has systematically dismantled, using weapons that military planners barely understood 3 years ago. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to States News. We deliver the geopolitical and military analysis that reveals what is actually happening beneath the headlines. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The world is changing faster than most people realize, and understanding those changes is how you stay ahead of events rather than being surprised by them. The next development is already unfolding. Make sure you are here when we analyze it.